what day is it? Tuesday. Hope everyone's having a good afternoon or evening. If you're joining us from Poland, it's so exciting. I'm so grateful to be here. Big fan of the Service Design Network and Birgit and all the work that she's done. So as Thomas said, my name is Dan Butts. I go by he, him pronouns, and I'm Director of Innovation and Service Design at Feeding America. I think we're all trying to learn and grow, as a profession and as professionals. We're trying to improve the way that we provide value to our customers and to our clients and our partners. And so I want to be able to share today some of the lessons that our team has learned about in-house innovation and the role of service design as in-house innovators. And where we fell short and what we learned about those things, and share those lessons with you so that you can build upon those going forward. I also want to kind of highlight the difference of what design looks like in the social sector and how it looks different and should be different than what it looks like in the for-profit sector, because I think there's some key ways that we need to keep in mind, particularly if we are consultants coming in and consulting to the social sector. So really looking forward to the conversation today. Before we get started, I'd love to just do a quick poll. I think Michelle is going to help me with this to just understand who we have joining us today. So thanks, Michelle. So I think this should be 2 or 3 questions. What's your professional role? Are you an in-house designer, a consultant, a student, something else? What's your primary field of work? Are you in the social sector, the civic sector? I think there might be other responses. Yes, if you scroll down, great. Right, so it looks like there's a good mix of, in terms of professional roles, good mix, both in-house and consultants. In terms of primary field of work, a lot of people from the private sector. I'll keep that in mind, a few people from the social sector. And where are we calling from? Got a few people from Poland. Really looking forward to our next session with the Poland chapter, and mostly from the US, and then some others. Sorry others. We celebrate you as well, wherever you're from. Great. So yeah, as Michelle talked about, I'll just close this poll. This is a 2-part series about the food system, and I'm going to talk about one aspect of the food system, which is the food that gets wasted in the food system. And as you all know, unfortunately, there's a lot of food that gets wasted in that system. And so I'm going to talk about some work that we've done as in-house innovators at an organization called Feeding America, which is a nationwide nonprofit organization, to rescue that food and put it to its highest and best use, which is feeding people that need that food. So to get started, I wanted to just highlight some of the ways that I think that we've learned as a team, how design in the social sector looks different than the private sector. And this isn't meant to be exhaustive. These are just some things that we've learned. And as a caveat, everything I'm saying is about that I've learned with my team. This isn't anything about what Dan has learned, but it's things that Dan has learned in collaboration with his teammates, and I just get to be the one to share this information. So one of the main things that when you work in the social sector is our goal is often about impact versus income. Maybe that's pretty obvious. Tends to be easier to measure income, right? You could get a sense as to like how much someone's paying and how much it costs to provide that service. Impact, though, takes time. You have to measure that thing over time. It often requires multiple parties, not necessarily the first party that engaged with a client or a neighbor, to measure that impact. And so because of that, in the social sector, we tend to measure outputs rather than outcomes. And the challenge there is that those outputs aren't necessarily already well correlated to those outcomes. A second kind of major difference is that often in the social sector, we're working in loose networks of networks. Each different organization is trying to serve a different type of need, but ultimately we're all whole beings that have multiple complex needs, and these different organizations are trying to meet those needs. So what that means in terms of implications is that change looks different in this environment, whereas in a franchise environment, you could push out something and get everyone to adopt a change or a new service or a new tool. In a network of networks, you're different organizations with different systems and different ways of different values potentially. And so what's really important in the social sector is social capital and really building that. And that's something that also builds up over time. Because if people don't buy in to the change, they're not going to adopt it. And so that's where service design could be so helpful, because we are great facilitators and we are great at bringing people to the table. And as Birgit said, if we bring that lens of equity, we're bringing together the people that are represented and not often not represented to that table. And so service design could be great at that in terms of helping to kind of address that challenge. And the third kind of major difference that we've noticed is often in the for-profit sector, you're transactioning to retain customers, right? And therefore you develop better and better experiences to do that. Often in the social sector, we have transactions to try to change a situation. Often that might be one or two interactions. Sometimes it's ongoing. Because there's less of a focus on retention, that means the experience often gets ignored in the social sector. And so there's lots of opportunities to think about how can we improve that experience. So I wanted to share some of this kind of underlying differences between the for-profit and social sector that you'll see represented in the case study that I'll share in a little bit. Before I get to the case study, though, I want to make sure we're all grounded in context and empathy building, right? So this is Sherman, one of the many millions of people that our network has served, in the last couple of years. Sherman's a retiree, lives on a fixed income. He lives far away from the nearest grocery store. So for him, he relies on a food pantry, to meet his basic needs. Without that pantry, he would be skipping meals. He would be, going without for what him and his wife need to get by. Sherman is one face of food insecurity, but there are many faces of food insecurity. Food insecurity can affect all of us. We see during the pandemic, millions more people accessing the charitable food sector, or in the US with our government shutdowns that happened in 2020, many people that have never accessed charitable food before were accessing it. Because many of us are living, only 1 or 2 paychecks away from not being able to feed our families adequately. So the face of food insecurity is a very varied face. It's not just people that are homeless. It's often people that are working 2 jobs, and even with those 2 jobs aren't able to pay their bills and meet their basic needs. Continuing for a little bit more context, in this, unfortunately, this is the US data, not global, but before the pandemic, 1 in 9 people were facing food insecurity. That means food insecurity is defined as not being able to meet your basic food needs for your household. During the pandemic, that got worse, right? 1 in 8 people were facing those needs. And if we look at people of color, for African-American households, it's about 3 times higher, and Latin American households or 2.5 times higher are more likely to be food insecure. So it's important to note that food insecurity affects a lot of people, but it affects people of color and rural communities even more severely. So I work at Feeding America, which is a network of food banks. We're currently 199 food banks, and then those 199 food banks work with about 60,000 plus food pantries. Generally speaking, food banks are large warehouses that will rescue food from the food chain, whether from the manufacturers, suppliers, farmers, individuals. They'll get that food into one location and then get it out to food pantries. Those food pantries could be churches, they could be community organizations, they could be a variety of things. And this model has evolved since the 1970s in the US, and now we have food banks all across the world. And it's evolved in such a way that it's just been this organic evolution of this network of networks. Again, the key thing here is that these are all independent organizations, each with their own budgets and their own kind of focuses, but working loosely together to address food insecurity. So you'd imagine some of the challenges there when you're working with 60,000 food pantries is, as you're thinking about experience, how do you address experience where that's where most people accessing charitable food do so at a food pantry? How do you do that when there's 60,000 food pantries or even 199 food banks?